It is one of the greatest privileges of my life to have known my grandfather, Robert Chester Cottrell. Many called him Pop, but I called him Grandpa. Grandpa was one of the toughest and smartest people I have ever known. He was also the greatest storyteller I've ever known. I'd like to share with you some amazing stories and personal memories of this incredible human being. For those that don't know him all that well, you should know that he was prone to making outrageous claims his entire life, such as being a member of the Black X Gang, wrestling alligators, and even winning the entire war in Korea, all by himself. Near the end of his life, I started doing a little digging and discovered that, holy cats, some of his claims are rooted in truth. Grandpa lived an amazing life. I've always been curious about his origins. Where did this man come from? He claimed to have relation to William Cottrell of the Civil War's Cottrell's Raiders. Not really something we should be proud of. And the family changed the last name to something so off-putting no one would connect the dots? Cottrell? It's almost like being a descendant of Hitler and changing your family name to Shitler? Surprisingly, my own research is showing that his claim may actually be true. More about Grandpa's childhood is known than his ancestry. He and his twin brother Ralph were born in New York City on April 11th, 1930. When their parents, Ralph Cottrell Sr., born in 1890, and Alma Gotcha, born in 1900, divorced, the boys moved to Lincoln Park. They went to New Jersey with their mother, Alma. They had another sibling in 1936 named Walter. Much remains unknown about him except that his father was likely not Ralph Sr. Growing up in New Jersey was surely unlike the city. The Cottrells lived in a tiny house along the Pompton River. The house would flood quite often. The boys walked everywhere, collecting coal from the railroad tracks to heat their home in the cold seasons. They walked to work and, of course, to school. As an adult and a music teacher, his school years fascinate me. It was during this chunk of his life that he would memorize poems like Casey at the Bat and O Captain, My Captain. But this is also where he learned that dreaded and very racist tune, Ol' Zip Coon. As long as I can remember, he performed these pieces of his repertoire for anyone who wanted, or didn't want, to hear them. It was also during this time that he began his leadership role in the, presumably later named, Black X Gang. The story goes, around the time that he was in 5th grade, Grandpa, Ralph, and a few other boys were bored in class one day. When the teacher, possibly Mrs. Davison, excused herself to the restroom, the boys decided to climb out of the 2nd-story window and run across the street into the woods. There allegedly was a rope swing that they had built at an earlier point in time, and they used it to cross a creek. Back inside the school, Peggy Cusai frantically raised her hand and yelled from her desk, "Teacher! Teacher!" Miss Davison ran back into the room and then to the principal's office. The principal supposedly carried a whip and ran outside to catch the boys. He was unsuccessful. It's likely that this Black X Gang adventure ended with Robert and Ralph getting beaten with a broomstick by their mother. Grandpa's teenage years included working various jobs like the one on the farm where he broke his wrist that never properly healed, in a diner, and in a bowling alley. During his later teen years, he worked as an airplane and engine mechanic. He and his brother also picked up construction work until Grandpa would have to serve in Korea. Brother Ralph would stay behind to care for the younger brother Walter. In 1952, Grandpa was sent to the war that he would win all by himself. In 1986, a book was published titled Korea, the First War We Lost. Grandpa was devastated. He'd have to go out and buy every copy of the book so he can continue to say that he won the war. For the few that didn't know him, Grandpa would often recount the horror stories from war. I remember a lot of these stories, some happier than others. One about cracking 4 eggs open with one hand. Another about an incredible sea voyage to Korea. Times where he was promoted to various different ranks within the army. When he fought on the front lines, he removed mines. He pulled shrapnel out of his skin. He shot somebody. There was a guy that he called Luigi, aka Mr. Spaghetti Leg Gross. And then he also invented the sknife, a spork and knife hybrid. I loved hearing him tell all of these stories. After he returned from Korea in 1953, Grandpa met Margaret McCreary. I called her Nana. Grandpa and Nana were married in 1955 and together had 3 children, Robert, Gary, and Linda. Grandpa built a house on Stony Brook Road that he would raise the family in and lived in until just before he passed. His post-war adult life included working for the police and working as a carpenter. He was considered an expert and qualified instructor when it came to firearms. Between 1966 and 1967, he made the newspaper for winning several pistol team-related events. I assume that it was during his pre-grandchild adult life that he acquired much of the novelty skills that I will truly miss dearly. I remember him telling me stories of fingertip push-ups and arm wrestling and even more outlandish things like wrestling alligators or eating peanut butter sandwiches without a glass of milk. Perhaps it was during this era that he came to learn everything there was to know about bees and began collecting coins. I do know that this is where his less than traditional parenting style emerged. Who could forget parenting tools like Ringo in the Dark, the game where he'd turn off the power from the breaker box in the basement and sneak around scaring the children? Or, let's leave the fireplace burning on Christmas Eve because we're going to kill Santa. I actually ended up writing a song with a similar message during the pandemic. It is also assumed that he heard some of the best anti-humor jokes during this period, and like Ol' Zip Coon, would share these with many an unwilling listener. You may remember some of these greatest hits like Glue Fingers Kowalski, The Three-Legged Chicken, The Turtles on a Picnic, that vulgar poem about the pig, and my personal favorite, Big Bad Ed. Many folks have heard him tell that one. You know the ending. Big Bad Ed will be here any second. And we never find out who Big Bad Ed is. Well, it took me 30 years of hearing it, telling the story myself, and even turning it into a song to realize that Big Bad Ed was Grandpa. When Big Bad Ed / Grandpa, that tough guy, had grandchildren, he still remained active. He climbed on roofs, he cut firewood, he continued to help in various building and carpentry projects. The man would not willingly retire. He claimed at age 75 that he was middle-aged because he planned on living to be about 150. This is where I entered the story. I was born in 1991 to his daughter Linda and her husband Robert. There are a lot of Roberts in this story. Grandpa is named Robert, who had a son named Robert, who has a son named Robert. My middle name is Robert. My dad's name is Robert. If we go into my father's side of the family, there's even more Roberts. It gets really confusing. Anyway, in my teenage years, I spent a great deal of time with Grandpa. I absorbed his sense of humor and his storytelling skills. The first real bonding moment I remember with Grandpa is having him help me build a tree fort in my parents' backyard. Linda was not happy about this. Grandpa would bring over goodies from his collection of treasures. Many of you would know that as the junk in his 4 sheds. And he would bring me these goodies to help soup up the tree fort. Throughout high school, I took trumpet lessons in Fair Lawn, New Jersey. Grandpa would drive me every Saturday morning, and after the lesson, we would get burgers at a restaurant called Johnny and Hange's. I tried to tell him about what I was learning, and he would ask some of the most informative questions I've ever heard, especially from a non-musician. Grandpa definitely appreciated music, and I think he appreciated his time with me. I know that I appreciated the time with him. When it came time to practice driving cars, Grandpa was my chaperone. On my 17th birthday, he went with me to the DMV to take my driver's test. I got my license. He must have been a good mentor. Eventually, I moved away for college. When I came home, I'd play piano and sometimes he'd sing. There are some great videos that have surfaced from the family of him singing and me playing. Those sure make me happy. As his health started to decline and his memory started to fade, I became interested in a newer field of study called music therapy. One of the main branches of this field includes using music to help folks struggling with dementia and other cognitive disorders. I guesstimate that during 2017, Grandpa forgot who I was. This was challenging to cope with. How could someone I felt so close to not know who I am anymore? After I was able to process this and realize what a despicable disease dementia was, I encouraged the family to use music to try and bring Grandpa back. Living 2,000 miles away made it challenging to help. It wasn't until just before the end of his life that I started to apply my learned skills and embrace technology to try some unofficial music therapy out on Grandpa. I felt the results were incredible and looked forward to continued attempted sessions. There's even a video that was captured of one of our sessions. Unfortunately, our time was cut short and we never got to have those continued sessions. This doesn't void the joy Grandpa brought to my life. I have so many great memories of him. I even got to teach him a thing or two, including some new anti-humor jokes. Would you like to hear one? I have plenty to tell. I will never forget him. I think it's also safe to say that his entire family, from children to grandchildren, would all call it an honor to have known him. Thank you, Grandpa. You've had a profound impact on my life.